First of all, I want to thank you for taking time to join us in this conversation with Mark Greene about Christian vocation and how to live as a Christian in your work environment. And we are particularly excited at Eastern MST about this because this is at the heart of what we're about, preparing people to operate Christianly in their particular disciplines and work environments. So welcome Mark Greene from the UK. We've turned out the weather for you in typical Melbourne style so that you would feel really at home. Murray Wright, wherever you are, Murray, thank you so much. And I want to just a big shout out to Lindsay McMillan of the Carrum Forum and Reventure. I know you guys have done such an incredible amount of work to make these conversations with Mark possible here in Australia. We're in 3 capital cities on the eastern seaboard, I believe. Before I formally introduce Mark, just some housekeeping. Mark's talk will be followed by a Q&A session and conclude with afternoon tea, which I believe will be out there somewhere. Now, bathrooms, if you need them, are to my right down the corridor here, and don't hold the gold taps that you'll find there against us. We inherited them from a previous owner. Okay, a lot of time polishing those up. Now, the information that you'll hear today can be accessed on the website, Mark's website, which is puttingyourfaithtowork.com.au, puttingyourfaithtowork.com.au, and the video recording will be available on that. If you forget that, you can get onto Eastern's website and we'll have a link from Eastern's website to this one, so you'll be able to get the recording. So I know there are a number of people that weren't able to be here because it's between semesters. We understand that, but you'll be able to get access to the recording. So look out for that. A disclaimer, we are taking some photographs today for publicity and social media, and if you have some privacy concerns about that, please talk to our communications manager, and I'm looking for where Grace is. She's here somewhere floating around, but if you have some issues, perhaps see Cheryl Osmond here, our general manager. She'll look after you. Okay, so Mark Greene. He grew up Jewish and joyous in northwest London. Can that be possible? In his last month at university, God wooed him into his kingdom, and he went on to work for 10 years in advertising. I believe you spent a bit of time in the Big Apple in New York. But gripped by a desire to study God's word, he took a career break to study at the London School of Theology. This turned into a career change. He ended up on the teaching staff, teaching communications, engaging with contemporary culture, and eventually serving as vice principal there. And then Mark joined the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity as executive director in 1999 to focus on the call to see all God's people empowered to live their whole lives, Monday to Saturday, as well as Sunday, in a dynamic and fruitful relationship with Christ. He's spoken and written widely on the topic and on work in the UK, continental Europe, and the US, and has published some works which include Thank God It's Monday, Supporting Christians at Work, Pocket Prayers for Work, Christian Life and Work, which is a DVD, and The Best Idea in the World. Actually, it's called Probably the Best Idea in the World, and Fruitfulness on the Front Line. And in 2016, to celebrate the 90th birthday of Her Majesty the Queen, Mark co-authored The Servant Queen and the King She Serves, which looks at the Queen's personal faith in Jesus and the impact that this has had on her work for the nation and for the Commonwealth. Recently, Mark has written The One About, a collection of true stories about God at work in our everyday lives. I don't know if any of those publications are here, but they'll be able to go into the website and get some details if I want to access them, I understand anyway. Mark's got degrees in Hebrew from Cambridge, Theology from the London School of Theology, and Communications and Media from Edinburgh. He's married to Katrina, a Finn, and they have 3 adult offspring. Mark enjoys films and fiction a lot, and I'm told he does a passable imitation of Mr. Bean and a terrible one of Sean Connery. His wife wishes it were the other way around. His children wish he wouldn't do either. So with that, can we please give Mark a great big welcome today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I wonder if I have a clicker. I do. Thank you very much. Thanks to the tech team for that. Wonderful. It's a very nice one. If you don't get it back, you'll know who's got it. Well, thank you very much for the welcome. Really, really pleased to be here. We've heard such very positive things about the college here, and so a particular privilege to speak here this afternoon. So here's a question for us from a church leader, really. What kind of disciples does Jesus want to send out into the world, and what kind of church will help to make those kind of disciples? It's a good question, isn't it? What kind of disciples? So let me begin with a story, as is my wont. So Victoria is an apprentice hairdresser. She's 19 years old, and she's been in her job for just 1 month. It's quite a busy salon, so there's always something to do in that salon. And she's enjoying it, but the pressure's kind of got to her a bit. She's right at the bottom of the pile, if you like, and so on and so forth. And 3 weeks into her job, her pastor commissions her, prays for her, commissions her into this role. And she told me that she's been feeling a bit more at peace since then. So I happened to go down to Bath, and it turns out that she was in the worship group, and there's a very large group of people there, about 300. And so I asked her forward, never having met her before, and I had heard that she just started her job, and I asked her this question. So what difference does being a Christian make to the way you wash someone's hair? Which is a pretty unfair question when I thought about it afterwards. But curiously, she said, quick as a flash, I pray for people as I massage in the conditioner. I'm sure she massages the conditioner in very well as well. And I'm sure she sweeps up the hair very well as well. I'm sure she makes a very good macchiato for the clients. But there it was. That was her response. I pray for them as I massage in the conditioner. And I wonder what might have struck you about that story. I wonder what beliefs does Victoria hold to do that? Her praying is an invisible gift, isn't it, to her clients. They don't know it's happening. Soothing conditioner for the soul, not just for the hair, if you like. And behind her prayers are a whole set of beliefs. She believes clearly that the actual work she's doing is important to God. Otherwise, why would she be praying as she was doing it? And she believes that she can do it and is doing it in a distinctive way. She believes that God is alive and can move in a hairdressing salon, can not only hear above the sound of the hairdryers, but actually respond, if you like. She believes that God wants to bless her clients, otherwise she wouldn't be praying for them, and that she can in some way be part of that. She believes, obviously, in the power of prayer and in God's freedom to respond in whatever way the Lord actually chooses to respond, and in his own time. She doesn't need to see the results of her prayers right then. In fact, she may never see the results of the prayer. She's an apprentice hairdresser. She may never get, if you like, with those particular clients in that particular salon, behind the chair to talk to people for half an hour, 45 minutes, while she's doing somebody's hair. She may never get that. She may never see the results. And yet, she's happy to pray. She knows that it's worth praying. God is still listening. She's confident in the God who sends her. So the question is, what kind of church community makes disciples like Victoria at 19 years old? So I would submit to you that she's kind of rare. What kind of theological college makes pastors who make disciples like Victoria? What kind of theological college makes youth workers who give a 19-year-old that kind of vision when they go into the world? So in a moment, what I want to do is to say a bit about what's at stake here. But it is good, as I understand it, to have a mixed group of humans here, people representing different areas. We've clearly got some theological educators here. You can tell by the halos around their heads. And we've got some church leaders, you can tell because they look exhausted. And some humans who, well, I know there are at least 2 humans who actually work in the mainstream world for a living. So all welcome. And it's really good to have the potential, at least for a trial around this. Sadly, you may not get much time to talk to each other, and we have to go to the airport fairly briskly afterwards. So in many ways, I apologize for that, but I'm really grateful you invited me anyway. So I want to give you a little bit of background so you know where I'm coming from, and then we'll kick into some materials to look at what really is at stake here and give you some ideas going forward. So some of you know I used to work in advertising, so you can trust every word you hear from me this afternoon, and indeed every picture that you see. I spent 10 years working in advertising and in London and primarily in New York, and I don't know how you feel about your current job, and if you work for Eastern or Melbourne, just keep that to yourself for the moment. But I loved it. I just did. I just loved it. I loved the people. I loved the creativity. I loved the pace, and the luncheons were just awesome. But my testimony is this, that during that time I saw God work in extraordinary ways. I saw him answer prayer on prayer on prayer. I saw him heal someone on the 10th floor of a Madison Avenue advertising agency in the middle of the day. I saw him draw people to himself over time. It wasn't like every day, but over that 10 years I saw that happen. I saw him, help me through career disappointment. That happens to most of us, and most of us it happens to more than once. I saw him help me through character failure and romantic catastrophes, with the emphasis on the plural. And God at work, God at work, actually, in an ordinary job, in an ordinary place, really, amongst ordinary folks. So you don't have to trust me. What I learned was that it doesn't really matter what you do. You can trust God in it. Home and away, on a sports pitch, in an office, wherever it might be, in the church or a charity. And it was out of that experience that I wrote Thank God It's Monday, first book republished for the 5th time this year. Primarily because I realized that very, very few Christians really had this vision for their daily work. And it was time that they had it. And it's kind of tragic that they don't have it, really, that folk don't know that most Christians in the UK and around the world, it may be different to Australia, but so far I've discovered that on the whole it isn't. That most Christians in the world go into their daily work thinking that God's really not interested. And there are reasons for that. And after 9 years at Theology College, I went to the London Institute, and I normally explain what we do, and this may be helpful to you, and I think some of our material, I hope, will be helpful to you, through the lens of probably the most admired man in post-Second World War British culture, somebody guaranteed to save the world once every 3 years. And that person is, in fact, James Bond. Now, James Bond is not widely acclaimed in Christian circles for reasons which you may be aware of. And if you're not aware of those reasons, I suggest you either change church or theological college rapidly. But I do have evidence, really, that, for many of us, at least men, there's probably not a man in this room who's not at some point imagined himself to be Bond, James Bond, though I think some of the women might be rather skeptical of that. Nevertheless, that's what we do, and I do have evidence of this, as you can see from this. You're welcome, yes. I always like to guarantee not to be invited back. That's just one of my strategies. There's some more bad jokes to come and some wobbly theology, but one way or another. But the reality is that most of us actually are not like Bond at all. We're sort of a bit like Johnny English sort of characters. And there we are. That's what Johnny English looks like, in case you want to know. Now, when we're looking at culture as Christians, often we tend to knee-jerk to the negative, but actually it's important to affirm what's good in certain sorts of people. And about Bond, some things are true, and importantly so. He's courageous, persevering, resourceful, always the master of technology, never its slave. He is decisive and patriotic. He may, like Samson, sleep with the enemy, but unlike Samson, he never gives away secrets critical to national security. He is strong, agile, multi-skilled, intelligent, witty, cultured, and honest. And as one woman screamed out at a seminar, he's gorgeous. He's also a male chauvinist pig, an emotional desert, and a spiritual black hole. But apart from that, when James Bond goes on his missions to save the world, 5 things are true. He is properly briefed, he is trained, he is resourced, he is commissioned. That is, he is sent out with authority by his sending organization to do the thing that he has been given authority to do. And then he is supported. And when research has been done in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the noughties about whether if you like, lay people, ordinary people, feel themselves to be properly briefed, properly trained, properly resourced, and whether they have been commissioned or supported, the answer on the whole that adult Christians give us is no. There are not many Victorias in the world. And if you just look at just that word commissioned, and you ask yourself, well, how likely is it that a local church would commission a new youth worker publicly at the front of the church to that job? The answer is probably a 99.96% likelihood that that would happen. How likely is it that a church sending a group of young people on some mission, perhaps locally in Australia, or to say to the Philippines to help in an orphanage, how likely is it that the church would bring those young people to the front and they would commission, they would pray for them to send them out? I would say there's a 99.67% likelihood that that would occur. How likely is it that somebody going into a job in the first time in the CBD in Sydney, working for the fire department as a nurse, as a secretary, would be brought to the front of a church to be prayed for and commissioned into that work, which they're going to do for the next 40 years? Well, I can tell by the nods around the room. It is extremely unlikely. Extremely unlikely. Maybe 1%. Right there you have a problem. Right there, there is a narrative of what's important to the community. Right there. Now, I am not here to bash church leaders or theological colleges, tempting as it might be, because that's not going to help us, and it's just so deep in Christian culture for the last 200 years. There's no point in going, oh, what they didn't teach me at theological college or what they don't do in my church. That's not the issue that we're dealing with here. What we're dealing with is how do we move forward? And recognizing the marvelous work that church leaders do and the marvelous work that theological educators do as a baseline. The question is, how do we move forward? And it was because that's such a serious issue that a man called John Stott, he's the one on the right, one of the great, I think it would be fair to say, I think this is not hyperbole to call John Stott a great teacher. One of the great teachers of the 20th century, and one of the great missional leaders of the 20th century, founded the London Institute to address this issue. And we produce a range of resources that you can have a look at. And if you haven't already got one of these, and one or two of you have, this is something that we've got a few copies left, which is, it's actually 5 service plans, but at the back you can see a range of resources for church leaders, for whole churches, and for individuals and groups. So we'll make sure that they are at the back by the time you are allowed to escape, and pick those up and have a look. And you can connect to us on the website as well. We've also done some work in theological education for quite a long time, and we'll be publishing some stuff on that. So the question for us here is how do we move forward, and how do we drill down a bit further into what's at stake and why this is really, really, really important? Let me just clunk on a little bit here. So one of the reasons it's really important is that, as you know, and perhaps you experience yourself, most local churches are really rather good at neighbourhood and local ministry. And that's a fantastic thing. Certainly in the UK, it's just amazing to see how local churches, formally and informally, do marvellous things. And the capacity of church leaders to mobilise people behind those things is very impressive. And many local churches are quite interested in supporting things overseas and globally, and that's obviously very important. And you may well be in one where you're literally supporting financially some people, or you're twinned with a church overseas or whatever it might be. And that's great, and there's nothing wrong with those two things. But actually there is, if you like, a third area, and that's where people spend most of their time. That is where the 98% of people who are not in church-paid work spend their time during the week. What we might call frontline, it could be a school gate or a workplace or whatever it might be. And the reality is that overall, those people are not supported, that the vast majority of church money, church training, church focus does not go into the equipping of those people. So what it means is that 98% of people are not actually empowered and equipped for the 95% of their lives that they spend away from church activities. So just think about that in terms of potential. What happens if you flip that and you say, we really will try to help people be fruitful in that place? well, extraordinary things might happen. And furthermore, where are big decisions being made in Australian society? Where can change happen? Well, in law, in retail, in property, in healthcare, in education, in the arts, in the public sector, in politics, and where actually Christians are. We will not be able to do this from the outside. It's very, very hard to stand on the outside of any of those spheres and try to change them, not least because we may not understand them. So if we want to have an impact to bring, or at least offer, biblical wisdom to the society that we're in, then that's where we can do it. So this has a big impact on the potential of any society to, if you like, flourish. So there you have it, if you like, 98%. Now, at the moment, I could certainly point to very good practice in a number of places, and again, you can follow that up in some of the researches. But there is more at stake here, I think, than, if you like, a topic. You know, lay people mission, if the lay is the word that you use, if you're Anglican enough to use a word like that, but if you like, ordinary people mission, or a topic in a theological college, like let's have an elective, I think is your term here, let's have a module or elective on workplace ministry or on the theology of work. That actually often doesn't actually do very much. There's much more at stake here than an elective or a topic or 4 sermons on work or a small group doing work or even a workers' breakfast once a month in a church. All good things, and all good things that lots of churches have done. What is at stake here is the content of the gospel we live and the content of the gospel we share. You see, when John Stott founded the London Institute and started wandering up and down Great Britain and indeed around the world, telling people, you know, Jesus is really interested in all of your life. No, really, all of your life. No, all of your life. Yes, your life as a secretary, your life as a lawyer. He got, and we get, and I imagine those of you who've been teaching this, get a number of usually surprised reactions. Really? I mean, I'm just a factory worker. You can't be interested in that. Really? 5 loads of washing on Monday? Really? I mean, come on. Really? And then there's a moment, well, wow, that's fantastic. And while other people who kind of have always instinctively felt that this was right, and they just needed someone to say, yes, you're right. And then other people thinking, I don't think I really want that. And what does this tell you? It tells you 2 things. It's not the gospel that those people are taught, and it's not the gospel they are sharing. Back in the 1940s, the great British writer, apologist, and evangelistic broadcaster, a woman called Dorothy Sayers, a great friend of C.S. Lewis, bemoaned the church's failure to engage with the world of work. And in an essay on work, she wrote this: "In nothing has the church so lost her hold on reality as her failure to understand and respect the secular vocation. She has allowed work and religion to become separate departments and is astonished to find that as a result, the secular work of the world is turned to purely selfish and destructive ends, and that the greater part of the world's intelligent workers have become irreligious or at least uninterested in religion." And then she goes on to say, "But is it astonishing? How can anyone remain interested in a religion which seems to have no concern for 9/10 of his life?" And though she was an early feminist, that was the possessive pronoun she used. It was his. How can anyone remain interested in a religion which seems to have no concern with 9/10 of his life? So her point is not primarily about work here. Her point is about the scope of the gospel. Work is a symptom of a failure to teach the scope of the gospel. The failure to teach work and vocation is part of a wider failure, therefore, to teach a whole life gospel to believers, and therefore a failure to offer a whole life gospel to non-believers. What is the scope of the gospel we offer people? Is it only freedom from, or is it also freedom for? What is the invitation that Jesus makes? So perhaps no wonder people are not gripped, if you like, by some of the ways that we have presented the gospel to them. Who would be interested in a religion that seems not to be interested in 9/10 of my life, much of which I'm quite excited about? So the Word of God does indeed tell us through Paul that Jesus is the co-creator of all things, and that he both created them, was created by him and for him. And it does indeed tell us that he came, that God the Father sends him to reconcile all things to himself, and that he did that work by shedding his blood on the cross. It's not some things, it's all things. So what part of the universe, what part of our life is Jesus not concerned with? And the answer is there is nothing he is not concerned with. And a while back, an American social activist, Christian, who's a slightly more controversial figure now, but I think what he said then was absolutely fantastic. A man called Tony Campolo. Some of you may be familiar with him. And if you are, you'll know how he probably would have said what I'm going to say now. He said this: Evangelism is an invitation to join a movement to change the world. And if you know him, that is pretty good, I think. I'd like you to clap, but you're not going to. And he does this for some reason. He closes his eyes because he has the script written under his eyelids, I think. Now, you know and I know that evangelism is more than that, and so does he. My question is it ever less? We are always inviting people to participate with Jesus in the great mission of God, which is moving towards the renewal, the total renewal, the new heaven and the new earth, and our participation in that work up to that time, in his kingdom, to make the world as much like he wants it to be before he returns again. So I think he's right. I think that is the invitation. I do not think that is the invitation we make usually to people. And a symptom of that is that we do not give people a vision for their daily work, nor necessarily do we seek to disciple them, enable them to live well in those places where they are doing that work, places which are often quite difficult. So as my colleague said, it's my colleague Neil Hudson, who's been allowed into Australia before, lucky man, and he said this: work, it's irritating, this is one of the best quotes I've got from anyone in the world, and it's Neil. It's just annoying to me, frankly. Anyway, work is not a topic to be addressed, but a context to disciple people for. So you need the theology, you need the practical skills, and you need the spiritual resources. In discipleship, you need them all. So what we have noted, if you like, is that there is a theological barrier to fruitfulness, to enabling all God's people to be fruitful in all of their life. And the theological barrier people sometimes call the sacred-secular divide, the false belief that some things are really important to God. Church, prayer meetings, social action, evangelism, and so on are all important to God, and some things aren't. Music, arts, sport is not important to God, except in Australia, where it's close. Is it close to God in Australia? I'm not sure. Food, sleep, no. Sleep is for wimps, and so on and so forth. And so on, you know. Now, this is actually a heresy. It's not just a misunderstanding. It's actually, it's bad. It's unhygienic. It is unsound, as people would say. It is a disease. And so you get things like this, a quote. Here's a quote from a school teacher who said this: I spend an hour teaching Sunday school, and they haul me up to the front of the church to pray for me. Quite right. Second half of the quote. Can anybody guess the second half of the quote? Anybody guess it? Okay, very good. The rest of the week I'm a full-time teacher, and the church has never prayed for me. I guarantee you my copy of Frontline Sundays for that response. Thank you very much. And there it is. At one level, it's not deliberate, and this is why this is so important. No church leader, no prayer leader is deliberately saying, you know, the 45 minutes of that, or the hour that teacher spends on Sunday, that's really, really important. And the 40 hours you spend amongst children who primarily will not necessarily have parents who are interested in Christianity, or even drop you off at the 1-week holiday club, even though they're not interested, because it's great if it's a good way to amuse the children. No, they're with parents who are not like that. And maybe the staff room has got 5 Christians in 100 people. Nobody's saying that the rest of the week is less important, but the culture has communicated it. So this is a cultural issue rather than just a point to be made. It's deep in the way we do things around here, which means that we have to actually be quite self-reflective about why that might be. And the second barrier to, if you like, fruitfulness in the workplace is what you might call the methodological barrier, which is the dearth of disciple making. So what do I mean by this? Clearly, everyone's interested in people being converted, but discipleship is more than being converted. Discipleship is an ongoing relationship with Jesus, ongoing relationship in community with others, where you are intentionally seeking to learn and grow. So when Jesus said to the 11 that were left, if you like, and the 12th that joined them, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and so on, what do you suppose his disciples heard? What do you think they thought he was telling them to do based on what he did with them? Well, probably what they thought he was telling them to do was go and have the kind of relationships that we've had together with other people. And what kind of relationship did Jesus have with the 12? Personal, ongoing, dialogical, walking, eating, sleeping, drinking, highly relational, watching him doing things, going off and giving him a go yourself, coming back and getting feedback from Jesus, and so on and so forth, having their character challenged. Who is the greatest? Let me show you this child. We couldn't get him out. Oh, that kind only come out by prayer and fasting, and so on. So reflective practitioner language, if you like. All of it going on. Is that what we do? Is that the character of local church around the world? It sounds like a very, very high bar. And actually it is a high bar. And probably takes about 5 to 7 years to change it. So it's not a trivial thing to begin. But the reality is, in my culture, and again, quite a lot of Australians have come to the UK to, pick up on what we've been learning and then take it on here and improve on it. But we have what you might call a convert and retain strategy. Convert people, keep them in the church. Whereas Jesus seems to have a grow and release strategy. So what I'm saying here is that if we're going to see, if you like, a movement, if we're going to see something change for the long term, not just help some people in the workplace, some people on the front line, we're going to have to change the consciousness, the culture and practice of the church. We need a whole life missional consciousness and a disciple-making culture. Now, to give you an idea of how deep the challenge, so if you go forward in the diocese where I've seen this, to put yourself forward to become a minister in the Anglican Church, and by the way, it's pretty much the same in the Baptist, but if you go forward to become a minister in the Anglican Church, and you have to go through an approval process. During that approval process, you go away for a weekend, and they ask you all kinds of questions. Well, I've seen the question bank, and there's not a single question in the question bank from which people choose the questions they're going to ask individuals, which says, tell us about how you've come alongside someone to help them grow as a disciple of Jesus, or to help them grow as a Christian. Not a single question. So it's a cultural issue. Some people may do it, some people may not, but it's not part of the consciousness. So we need, if you like, sacred-secular divide shapes a church culture, the conversations that we have or don't have, the worship, the refreshments, the welcome, the preaching, the prayer. What do we pray for, and so on. Now, I want to say that this sounds incredibly daunting at this point, and we've worked now with literally hundreds, perhaps, well, actually thousands, not in the high thousands of church leaders, together in order to work out how to change culture. And it's actually possible. And it's actually, you don't need any money to do this. That's a relief. You don't need any new staff to do this, which is a relief. And you can start this afternoon. Because it's about consciousness. Because it's about the conversations you have, the questions you ask people, and so on. It's not primarily about activities, though that expresses itself in activities. Well, let me give you an example of how simple this might be to change. How many of you, as a matter of interest, in churches that use some kind of projection facility And you know, in a worship context? Well, yeah, quite a lot of you, yeah. So, for example, you might have something like this. You might be singing a hymn and you might put something behind it, something pretty like that. I mean, it's a beautiful scene. That is somewhere in Australia that I'm not going to see this trip or probably ever in my lifetime, because they just work me and work me and work me. Not that I'm bitter, not that I'm exploited like a slave, but thank you very much. Be thou my vision. Okay, so that would be a common thing to do, wouldn't it? It's lovely. It's lovely. Or you might have this one, although that might not be appropriate, actually, it occurs to me, but there you have it. You might do that. Now, of course, what that tends to say is, where do we find God? And it's true. The heavens declare the glory of the risen Lord. It is true. And, you know, creation's got its fingerprints on it, and let's not diminish that. But if all the pictures are like that, what does it do to the psyche? What happens when you do this? What happens to a congregation when that's it? Do I think, oh, it's meant to be in my city? What's my vision? What's our vision for the city? Or maybe a less she neighborhood. Or maybe, what would it look like if that's where I worked? Or, this is Angelo's kitchen, and I just got a text actually from his wife earlier. That's the picture, and you left it like that. Yeah, that's very good. Or maybe, yeah, maybe something like that. You know, that is a Melbourne club apparently. So, how does that change the consciousness of people? It's a very small thing. I'm not saying anybody needs to do any of these things. It's just an example of how actually, when you get this, it's quite simple to change. So a few words on culture change now, just to help us see where this might take you, either in a workplace or in a theological college or in a local church. Culture, as you know, one definition is culture is the way we do things around here. And what you're looking to do, if you like, is to find something to begin with, a little thing that you can do which carries this DNA, like changing a slide, like changing an element of the prayer that you might have in the middle of a service. It's a very small thing, like asking somebody a question, like, tell me where you saw God in your week, as opposed to just, how are you? What's God teaching you through your work, as opposed to, how's your work? Just very slight shifts in questions creates a new culture. And we've been looking at this for scholars and for everybody else. And one of the definitions of culture is this. Culture is the way we do things around here. And of course, Australians do things very differently from English people, and as I've discovered, are superior in every way. But every town is different. If you go to Liverpool, it'll be different from what it is in Melbourne, and so on. And we don't tend to notice it. But the way people behave, at one level, some of it, does it really matter if you hold the fork with your left hand or your right hand or use chopsticks? Probably doesn't really matter. Probably no embedded values in that. But most behaviors actually come out of a set of beliefs. So some countries don't eat beef. Hindus don't eat beef. Muslims don't eat pork. And those are religious beliefs. And the French eat horse. And the English don't. There's a belief about it. And those beliefs come out of an ethos and it shapes things. Culture is the concrete manifestation of our beliefs. And so the core beliefs, who are the heroes? Who are the heroes in your culture? Who are the heroes in the local church? Who has what one person said the other day, an Australian said, who has stage time? Who's at the front of the church? Well, you can tell. Whose stories do we tell? Who are the heroes in a theological college? Who are the heroes in your workplace? You can tell the culture by who the heroes are. So what we're looking to do is to create systems where, if you like, Christos, those values are shaping the culture, shaping the way we do things around here. So the question is the way we do things around here likely to create a whole life disciple or not? Or is it likely to create a leisure time disciple? An evenings and Sundays disciple. Not because that's what they want to be, not because they're resistant, but that's just our emphasis. And so similarly with the stories we tell, what stories do we tell It's a very, very important thing. And let me give you an example of how simple that might be to change in a local church. One of the most effective small things that we stumbled on, it was given to me by a man who came out of a crowd of Methodist ministers at a conference. And I remember he had kind of strawberry ginger hair with a slight beard, and he was wearing glasses. And he was slightly pale. And he came and said, we've been doing this idea. We call it This Time Tomorrow. And what we do is we bring someone to the front of the church, preferably not the chief of police of Melbourne or a CEO of something, just somebody, and we ask them, what are you doing this time tomorrow? And the reason I say this ethereal thing, because I never found him again. He just disappeared. And I actually sometimes wonder whether he was an angel. I actually thought, he looked like, well, there's some pictures of angels. Apart from the absence of wings, he looked like that. And so you ask him, what are you doing tomorrow? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? How could we pray? How have you seen God? 2 or 3 questions, depending on where they're at. The impact in a community of that is very interesting, as you can imagine. What happens? Well, we just make a layperson, for want of a better term, the hero. They've got stage time. We've just said that dropping off the kids at school is significant to this community. Or we've just said that being an IT clerk is significant to this community. We make their story valuable to us. We're saying what you do, where you are is valuable. It implicitly affirms all other people. You might do it once a month. Lots of people do it once a month. And it triggers new conversations. In other words, afterwards at coffee, somebody goes, oh, I didn't realize that's a really clever way to handle pressure. I hadn't thought about that. Thank you very much. Oh, I didn't realize you were a teacher. Yes, what school are you at? Oh, we're at the same school. Oh, right. And so on. It triggers new conversations. Because what you're trying to do in a community is to have, in a sense, the right conversations. And of course, what you celebrate will be replicated. What is celebrated is replicated, and so on. Now, the thing here is the church needs to go further. Obviously, a community needs to go further. I'm going to say a few things about this. Than, if you like, just setting the context and so on and affirming it. One of the things that we found amongst lay people as we've done research on this, and of course, if you are somebody who's in a normal workplace or works from home or whatever it might be, then you might appreciate this, is that the vast majority of Christians in non-church paid work don't feel very fruitful. They don't think they're really doing very much for Jesus. Now, this is quite interesting because, you might look at them and think, oh, I think they're doing great stuff. But that's not how they feel. And this was really brought home to us. We did some work with some 20-somethings, late 20s, early somethings in Scotland. I was invited up to work with them for 2 years, go up every 3 months to spend 2 days with this group of 10 people, doing a variety of jobs, a banker, an actress, a housewife, a doctor, a teacher, and so on and so forth. Just a retail, somebody serving over a counter and so on. Really well-taught people, late 20s, early 30s, as I said, committed to this, really wanting to make a contribution. And we were hoping that this group, they were hand-picked by Mission Scotland, a Billy Graham organisation, would turn into the next cadre of workplace speakers, encouragers, writers, thinkers, mentors, coaches, whatever. And what we discovered after about 6 months was that none of them thought they were doing anything for Jesus, really. One of them had turned around to 2 schools, 2 primary schools from what we call special measures. In other words, failing schools in an urban regeneration area, 34-year-old woman, and she didn't think she was doing anything for Jesus. Seriously. Another guy helped set up what we call NHS 24 in Scotland, which is you can just dial in and talk to someone. In other words, a web version of access to advice and wisdom. You're not doing anything by helping people get well. So they were, if you like, confident employees, but not confident disciples. Now, why was this? Well, we went a bit further and we tried to figure this out for a while. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by this, more specifically. So once we were in a group, I was in a group with 15 men. It was a men's group, so that's why there were only men there. It's just one of those things. It happens. And the guy who was running it was a guy in telecoms, and he asked us this question. He said, what are you good at in the Lord at work? There it is. And of course, these were Southern English men. So what do you imagine that Southern Englishmen, how do you think they would respond being asked a question in public, what are you good at in the Lord at work? Well, you might think the English are very, very arrogant, and you may well be right. But the average Englishman in the South is not going to say anything, which is indeed exactly what happened. No one said anything. But he'd anticipated this, so he had all these Post-it notes out there and pens and said, well, if you're not going to say anything, why don't you write something on a Post-it note? So after a while, we all wrote something on a Post-it note and handed him the Post-it note. And he said, so you've written it down? You might as well speak it out. Clever. So the first person to speak was a guy called Kurt. And I'm going to just tell this story the way that he told it, because maybe that's most helpful, because it might give you an idea of what was really going on for him. So he's looking down at the coffee table. He's about 45 years old. He's looking down at the coffee table and he said, as some of you know, I'm a policeman. I work in the Armed Protection Squad. Now, this is big news in the UK because most of our police, 95% of our police do not carry guns. So there's and this is a group of boys, and we're unregenerate, toxic males, and we've just heard the word guns, so we're very excited. And so that was very exciting. And then he says, I actually protect the Prime Minister at number 10 Downing Street. Oh, wow, this is kind of cool. I mean, he's just an ordinary policeman. He's not a senior guy. Oh, wow, gosh, And then he said, it's quite a macho team, probably, and over the years there's been quite a lot of conflict. And then he said, but over the years I've found I'm quite good at bringing people back together. He just looked at the coffee table, and there was silence in the room. Embarrassed silence, actually. Awkward silence in the room. And then somebody said, you've got a ministry of reconciliation. And then somebody else said, bless the peacemakers, that's what you're doing. And the smile on his face, it's like literally the lights went on, his shoulders went back, yes. He'd had a sense that maybe this was significant, but he hadn't seen it. So here is a guy who is teaching, it doesn't really matter that it's at number 10 actually, does it? Here is a guy who's teaching his team the ways to forgive in Jesus' ways in a work setting. I think that's a pretty cool story, but he can't see it. But when he did see it, confidence. Oh, God is working through me. Maybe I'm not such a rubbish Christian after all. See, God had been working through him, and something opened up for him. He suddenly realized, yes, I'm okay. And that happened to everyone in the room. We went around the room, and because somebody had started it off with, you've got a ministry of reconciliation, we all began to look for what was it in that story from the Bible, because it was the fact that the people said, we're able to connect the action to a biblical good. That helped him. It wasn't just well done. It was, here's where it is in the Bible. So you got a biblical affirmation because he didn't have a biblical imagination to make the connection between what he saw as de-escalation and mediation skills and forgiveness. So that was what was going on. Extraordinary. So the power of biblical affirmation and the power of group validation. My community is validating me. And it's actually quite hard to do because, in fact, we're not used to doing it. You have to learn how to do it. It's much easier to see it in other people. And almost all the stories in all the books that I've written, and there are lots of stories in these books, Fruit and Sunlight, thank God it's Monday, are stories from people who didn't think they had a story. We were in a restaurant in the Lanes in Melbourne with about, 60, 70 young people. I was at one table. There were 7 other people at this table. I did some stuff. Then they asked them, so do you have a story for me? Well, we didn't finish. We only got around 6 out of the 7. And, I could probably publish all of them. But they probably didn't have a story. Some of them were spectacular. Some of them were modest. But God was at work. They don't have to be spectacular. You see, when you don't think God is at work on you, you don't expect God to work. You don't consciously make yourself available to God. God, I know you work through me. I'm making myself again available to you today. Work through me again today. You don't think that. You think, I've been in this job 10 years. I've seen nothing. God doesn't work through me, so I'm not going to pray. You don't consciously ask God for help, and you don't ask the community. When people know that God can work, when they've seen it, then they know that God can work. They begin to expect God to work through them. They make themselves available to God. They ask God for help, and they share it with other people. That's the point here. So one of the things we need to help people do, and we've discovered it's a very simple thing, but it's very difficult to do, is to enable people to read their own lives through biblical lenses, which is partly a task of preaching and teaching, and partly a task for, if you like, small group work. How do we help people read the Bible well so they can read their own lives through it? And so that's the beginning of the Scottish experiment, and then we began to realize we needed to name fruitfulness for them. And of course, we know that all fruitfulness comes from Jesus. We have to be in the vine. But those Scots, the reason why they couldn't see they were being fruitful was because they had only two measures of fruitfulness, we discovered. One was an evangelistic conversation. If I'm having an evangelistic conversation, then I can report that on Sunday, or report that in my small group, or my life group, or my cell group, or my pastoral group, or my missional community, or my subatomic quark, or whatever the Australian language for that is, my huddle, my scrum, whatever it is. I can report that. That's a good. I get points, I get a tick. And the second one is direct social action. So if I directly do something good, I help the poor, I volunteer for the homeless, I counsel someone on debt or something like that. All of those are great things. Then people, they get points. And those are the two things that they knew they got points for. So now picture yourself as a teacher or a marketing executive or a midwife or an IT clerk, and you think to yourself, how many times in a day do I get an opportunity directly to have an evangelistic conversation? Well, not many. Maybe not one in a week with a colleague. Maybe over time, yes, but maybe, and how many times do I get to do direct social action? Well, maybe not at all in those contexts. I mean, I might care for people, yes, but I don't get to do direct social action. So at the end of the week, what have I done? Well, according to the indicators of my local community, the culture, I've done nothing. I have nothing to report. So God hasn't been at work in me. That's the problem. So that's why we needed to find a way to help people understand what biblical fruitfulness is and help them to see what God is already doing, what he might do. And we came up with these 6 things. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I just want you to see them for a moment. Modeling godly character, making good work, ministering grace and love, molding culture, being a mouthpiece for truth and justice, and a messenger of the gospel. Now, I will drill down a little bit, but not much. See, what we wanted to help people see is eyes to see what God is already doing. A vision for what he might do, and eyes to see what he's doing now. Where do you want me to focus, God? Because you can't do everything. You can't reach everyone. Where do you want me to focus? So just a few thoughts on, just to help you see what this might mean. Modeling godly character. Well, love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. But these happen in a particular kind of context. When Paul writes this, before he gives us those ones, he gives us these ones. So most workplaces have some of these things in. That's the context in which I have to be patient when there's anger, when there's dissension, when there's rage. That's the context when I have to be loving, when somebody is jealous, when somebody's doing something else. So actually, you need God's power to do that. But actually, you might notice, goodness me, actually, I am a bit more patient with him than I was. I am a bit kinder than I was. And you think, well, praise God. God's at work in me. Modeling godly character. And then there's obviously good work and do the work well. There's grace and love. How do you go a little bit further and so on and so forth. And what do we mean by these things? So you can model godly character at a party as well as in an office. You can do good work making a meal at home as well as doing good work when you make a meal in a restaurant. You can minister love and grace anywhere. You can mold the culture around a dinner table by putting a candle on there. You can mold the culture in a school, in a primary school, as a friend of mine did, because it was noisy and they were poor children and they never ate round a table at home. So she brought in tablecloths and put them over the tables in the canteen to reduce the noise. and to give the children a sense that this is a special moment, to increase the conversation and to try to model something different, which they didn't experience at home. There's loads of things you can, truth and justice sounds very grand, but truth and justice could just be stopping gossip on the school gate, making sure a colleague gets the credit. Well, take something simple. We've all been to a coffee shop, maybe many of us have worked as baristas, and what does it look like there? Well, a barista gets to model godly character because there's a very long queue and somebody cannot make up their mind between a double shot skinny latte with chocolate sprinkles and hazelnut syrup, or a double shot skinny latte with chocolate sprinkles and vanilla syrup. Please, there's 50 people behind you. Make a decision, or whatever it might be. They get to make good work. You've got 10 seconds to get that espresso shot into the milk. And if you don't, apparently chemically, it's not as good. You make good coffee, you get that shot in 10 seconds. So that's the goal. Yeah, I realize I'm in the capital of coffee here. I've never been in a place where there is so many coffee shops. I can't buy myself any cereal in Hawthorne, but I can get 900 different cups of roastery coffee. It's fantastic, but I'm like... Anyway, so that's why I chose the barista example, of course, because you understand this stuff better than I do. You get to minister love and grace. How do you do that as a barista? Well, you can't talk to everyone in the queue for a long time. But maybe you just say, well, she doesn't look very happy, I'll just spend 20 seconds extra. Or when you're clearing the cups, you take on the tray from a particular table, you think, I'm just going to spend a minute with that person. I mean, there are opportunities everywhere you go. Mouthpiece for truth and justice. Well, snuff out the gossip in the team. Notice that the rosters, I'm getting the lingo. The rosters aren't quite fair, and volunteer to change them. Point that out to them. It's not quite fair. I'll do a Sunday this time because she's done 3 in a row. And I know I like to go to church, but she's done 3 in a row. It's not fair. Let me do that. Whatever it might be. And then being a messenger for the gospel, take the opportunity when we get that. Now, this actually works. It doesn't matter. It works across all ages. We've done it with children. We've done it with teenagers. We've done it with students. We've done it with millennials, Generation X, Y, Z, Alpha, I, A, B, C, D, whatever. But the thing is, here's something I want to say about why do some things work and why they don't, as church leaders and as people in churches and as theological educators. What we discovered about this is that what it helps is give all of us a common language for. You may not like fruitfulness, you can choose another language. You may not like frontline, you can choose another word. It doesn't really matter. But you have to have a common language in a community for what you're doing. So frontline is a common language for daily mission. In England, other people say everyday faith or scattered saints. It's just a common language. So it doesn't privilege work. Everybody's got a frontline, not everyone's got a job. But we all get to play. It's good. A common understanding of what fruitfulness might look like. There may be 8 M's. I don't know. I was only allowed 6. I used to have 7. They got rid of it. I mourned the death of my child, as if you like. But it doesn't really matter. The notion is it's a trigger for conversation, for eyes to see. But here's what we didn't really see, and this has become actually a really, really important thing about how you change culture. And here it is. When people use the DVD of this, and we did research on it, and there are other people who've done research on this, and there are people writing PhDs on it, and one of their supervisors is in the room. What we discovered was that church leaders came back and said, we've never seen a course have such an impact on our culture, on the way that people talk around here. And we wondered, why is that? And then we did some research with group leaders, and they said the same thing. And we couldn't figure it out for a long time, and then we did figure it out. You see, you can teach that, and I'm not saying I did it well, in about 4 minutes. Those are not complicated concepts. But what happened when you do the DVD and you do it over 8 weeks is that somebody's got to talk about their front line for 8 weeks. And suddenly I discovered that this person has been a member of this tennis club for 25 years, and she was lady captain, but she never won the singles competition. And she's bitter, or that so-and-so really really likes rugby league. Well, how does that work? I mean, I don't understand that. I understand how you could love Australian rules football, but rugby league, surely not, whatever. Or whatever it might be. Or this is what my workplace is like. I knew you went to a high-flying job. I didn't realize it was so pressured. I didn't realize people were so nasty in that place. And when you know that information, you can't go back. So what happened was that the scope of the conversations that people were having, the scope of the relationship, the scope of what they knew about each other was widened and enriched. We know each other better. And when you have that, you can't go back. You can't go back. So that's why it changed it. Now I know this. We didn't used to have conversations about what people did out there. We had conversations about our personal life or about our family or about something in the church. We didn't really have conversations about what we were actually doing out there missionally. So what is the principle here? The principle again is we have to change the conversations. If you want to create a church culture that enables and fosters and nurtures people to be able to be fruitful over the long term out there, we have to have different conversations with one another, where those conversations are natural, as opposed to defaulting back. So creating a shared language is a really, really important thing. Whoops. There you go. So I'm going to close in one minute, really, and just give you an example of this to close from the Word of God. This takes 4 minutes if you're losing the will to live. There are lots of examples in the New Testament, obviously, of how of disciples of Jesus engaging and doing mission. And I don't know what the dominant example is model is in your denomination or in your local church. But in my church and overall in the UK, I'd say the dominant model is what I call early Philip. Early Philip is come and see. So he talks to Nathaniel and he says to Nathaniel, come and see Jesus. And that's a great ministry, isn't it? People say, come and see, come and have a look at my church, come and read the Bible with me, come to the karaoke evening, come to the quiz night, come, whatever, come and see. It's great. And it's great when some people have got a real gift for that. It's fantastic. But there's obviously more than that to it, isn't there? There should be more than that to it. So let me give you an example, if you like, from late Paul. Early Philip, late Paul. And late Paul, he's Acts 27, and you may recall he's on his voyage to Rome, he's under arrest. And usually when we see Paul, we see him in kind of quite short-term engagements. He's at Mars Hill. It's a big speech, important speech, we analyze it, but it's a one-off kind of thing, isn't it? Or he's in the marketplace and whatever it might be, those sorts of things. But here he's in a boat with 275 people for an extended period of time, and 273 of them are not believers in Jesus. So he is like a bloke working in, I don't know, IBM, whatever it might be, NAB, doesn't really matter, something with 3 letters. So imagine that you are Paul for a moment. There's a bit of gender transformation there, but imagine for a moment you are Paul or Paulina, and there's just you, Luke, and Aristarchus, the 3 red dots, 1% of the population. And what we see is he builds a good relationship with the centurion. That's a good thing to do. The centurion's in charge, builds a good relationship. And then one day you're praying about, going to Rome and the opportunity to speak this to Caesar. And the Lord tells you, if this boat carries on, it's going down. It's going to sink. It's going into liquidation. This boat will be no more. I was hoping for a little bit more of a reaction from the bad liquidation joke. But I gave it some time to sink in, but you obviously thought it was a bit of a sea-level joke and you weren't going to respond. So this boat's going down, so now how do you pray? And what happens is they reject your advice. You speak to power. It's a good phrase. Lots of theological educations use it. Speaking to power. So he does speak to power. The power of the state, tells the centurion. The power of expertise, the pilot. If you like, marine expertise, navigation expertise, and the power of money, ownership, the owner. So he's spoken to power, and power said no. Sometimes we have wisdom from God, and people say, not interested. Well, that's up to them. But now what does Paul do? What's he praying? Well, he knows the boat is going down. God has told him, but he's on the boat. So does he pray, Lord, now you've done this before. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to send us a whale. And I'd like it to be big enough to take me and Luke and Aristarchus to Rome. Dump us at the mouth of the Tiber. You've done it before. Why don't you do it again? Does he do that? Well, apparently he's not doing that. The storm comes, and it's terrible. Absolutely terrible. What does he do? In the midst of this boat, with the boat heaving, the waves crashing, the sky's blotted out, the wind blowing, it's going on for weeks. And your body, if it were you, lurched from side to side, and your stomach is in your cranium. Do you have any mental, emotional, spiritual space to pray for anybody else? Well, Paul seems to be interceding holistically for people. He prays for their mortal lives. He encourages them emotionally by telling them not one of them is going to die. And he witnesses clearly to them by telling them the source of this extraordinary confidence. An angel of the Lord I serve told me. Well, why does God send an angel? Maybe Paul's head he's just feeling so unwell. But God is going to get through to him. I don't know, it's speculation, but it's an angel. This is not that common. And then Paul strengthens them physically. He tells them, you need to eat. Eat already. Have some food. And then he protects them practically. When the sailors try to leave the boat later on, Paul says to the centurion, don't let them leave. We still need them. They're vital to this process. And this time the centurion intervenes, listens to him. So you gain credibility. And so he protects them practically. So he's under enormous stress, but this is a multi-dimensional vision for workplace or any place ministry. We intercede holistically, we try to minister emotionally, we witness clearly, we strengthen physically, and we try to protect people practically. I mean, there's more, but there it is. And I wonder whether that's the vision for people when they go into these kinds of places. I wonder whether folk in our churches have this kind of vision, whether our children really know that they are princes and princesses, if you like, in the corridors and classrooms of their schools. Does the mother at the school gate, the student at uni, the cleaner in the hotel, the labourer at the port, and so on, do they know this? Now, Acts 27, praise God, doesn't just give us a picture of the scope of a disciple's potential ministry in the everyday, in the boat that they're in. It also gives us a picture of the scope of God's resourcing of the disciple. So what does God do? He sends people with purpose into their world, doesn't he? We are sent. He grants favor to Paul with the centurion. He gives wisdom from above. There's no question that it was a dangerous time of the year, but 3 people who knew a lot about seafaring decided it was worth the risk. The certainty that it's going down is from above. The risk is common sense. The certainty is from above. He gives wisdom. He communicates whatever the barriers. He responds to prayer. Paul has been praying. The angel says, God has given you these people. It's a response to prayer. All 273 survive. He strengthens his people by his presence. He keeps his promises. Paul gets to Rome. The boat goes down, but Paul gets to Rome, and he fulfills his purpose. The gospel is preached there. So this is our God, the one who sends us and resources for us. This is the vision that I would yearn that we all carry in us, whatever we do. This is the vision of God's mission and of a vision that I would yearn that local churches would impart and strengthen and empower people for, and that theological education would indeed train and teach leaders to pass on. To his glory may it be. Amen.
Thank you, Mark, for that challenging address. And I know there's so many different people represented here, theological educators as well as church leaders and so forth. But we've got a few minutes for Q&A. We have got a roving mic, so if you'd like to ask a question, if you could just indicate, or maybe stand where you are and just give us your name and where you're from, what kind of work you do perhaps. Over here, someone got some microphones to come around for us? They're here somewhere. No, that's a clicker. No? Aha!
I came back to Australia 12 years ago. I'm now retired. I'm down here. And I'm working with a lot of young people between the ages of 18 to 40.
Yeah.
And I'd like to speak to two contexts. One is the fact of who they are and where they're not terribly enamored with who we, as the people of God, have trained them to be. But the other thing is that as we encourage them, and I believe very strongly that we need to be understanding the whole church is here for the sake of the mission of God. What I didn't hear today from you is the fact that the mission of God is very subversive of the culture that we live in and the industries that we are asking these people to go into. So whether it's a hairdresser who starts to think about how is the fact that I'm washing X number of people's hair a day, and that's leading to pollution, which the 18 to 40-year-olds are very worried about. Or the challenge to your own profession in Madison Avenue. If we don't disciple them to the subversive nature of what that's about, and it was there in justice and whatever, but it has to be much more dominant, in my opinion, if we're going to keep them following after Jesus, and if we're going to help them to be effective where they are. And part of my concern is I didn't hear that.
Very good, thank you. No, it's no, you didn't particularly hear that. But when I gave a filmed address for the Global Workplace Forum, my call to the workplace movement was that we need to be a prophetic movement in a variety of ways. So I would actually totally echo that. So I mean, some of the things that I mentioned, for example, you know, the church has been behind on gender issues and we should have been ahead. And we were in lots and lots of workplaces where, with Christians in charge of payroll and paying people and paying women less than they deserve to be paid. And in the UK, hiring is still, I mean, it's not racist, but it is certainly tinged by racism, and we have to be prophetic about that. And similarly, we have to be prophetic about the environment. Though on the whole, you know, within the UK context, an awful lot of companies are doing that very well for themselves, actually. And again, I'm not saying the church is behind this, I'm just saying they're taking a lead. And part of that is, as you say, part of that is partly recruitment, and partly because they've got young people there who say, I'm not going to use this kind of stuff. So, you know, biodegradable cups, yes. No plastic, yes. My son works at EY and is part of the sustainability business there, advising people on this. And so it's actually, so that one would be there. But your deeper point, I think, which I accept, which is we're not there simply to survive in these places. We are there to create a shift, a change. And so, for example, when you look at and to help people work out how to do that change. So, as you may be familiar, there's some research published very recently by Reventure and Lizzie McMillan's here today about loneliness in the workplace. So, how can it be that 37% of Australian workers are lonely? How does that work? What dynamics are we creating where one of the fundamentals of the gospel, which is good relationship, is something breaking down to the extent that people will self-identify as lonely in those cases? And so what do we then do about that? What is the Christian's role? Not only in befriending someone, but also in, if you like, look at the structure, what is going on here. So I'm with you on that. I'm certainly with you on the environment. And then you can ask questions about particular industries. And I think that is right. In other words, you know, have we assimilated things? So it's perfectly possible for somebody, and I've had this conversation with somebody, it's perfectly possible for somebody to be sitting in a London bank, for example. Apparently, everything they are doing on the day that they're doing it is perfectly okay. They're not ripping anybody off themselves. You know, everything about the transaction is honest. There's a fair profit on all sides, and so on and so forth. And actually, the profit over there is fine, and so on and so forth. But actually, it's ruining the water levels in Ethiopia. This construction project will do that, or it will affect farmers in Somalia, whatever it might be. And that's not necessarily part of their consciousness. So the global effect of something may not be part of their consciousness. So I think you're absolutely right. I think thank you for making the point. And what we're now seeing, and again this is very interesting because it's not just Christian young people who want this.
That's exactly right.
It is the culture that wants it. So when the Mars Corporation, for example, who've decided we're a family business, which gives them certain freedoms, and we want to be here in 100 years' time. And a lot of the business that we work with, the people who grow cocoa for us, are family businesses. We want them to be there in 100 years. So how do we operate now to ensure that that is the case? And so they've looked at every aspect of their business to try to make that happen. So it's that kind of reimagining, which is a radical thing. And to your point, I think because, I'm not saying every person between 20 or 18 is your number and 40 is like this, but it's kind of in the air. So we damage the gospel if we don't do this. I mean, my daughter, who's at the moment not walking with Jesus, high value of justice, I told the guys the other day, she said to me, so Dad, what do you think Jesus would eat today? So she keyed into my value set, and I was thinking, would he eat, do you think, beef that's produced in this way, which creates lots of methane, or would he eat non-industrial beef that's grass-fed, or would he eat beef at all? Would he eat these kinds of eggs where chickens are, I mean, he might eat eggs from chickens, but would he eat these kinds of eggs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, I'm eating a lot less red meat, and I can't wait for my daughter to leave home. But the point is, you're exactly right. If we do not do this, we actually mar our witness.
And the world is looking for that witness.
They are looking for that
Christian
witness.
out there is looking for that from us.
So thank you, Mary, for that. And Lord's blessing on you with those people. Thank you.
Hi, my name's David. I'm a pastor of the church. I guess I'm thinking about why is it, very compelling, thank you, why is it we aren't as orientated, in the directions we were talking about? And I'm kind of thinking to myself, okay, so as we as a church read the letters in the New Testament, the biggest impression I get is that if we get our theology right, like if, we've got to understand, say, our relationship to the law, like in Galatians, or some behavioural issues in Colossians or Corinthians. We need to get some relationships right between Jews and Gentiles. You've got the pastorals, which is all about how you structure a church. These seem to me to be the dominant themes of what we find in Scripture, which orientate us towards, well, what we need to do as a church is to get our theology right and to get our relationships internally right. And yes, all the letters have a back end where there's some universal applications that can apply to workplaces. Do you think we're misreading the Scripture? Is that not kind of where the letters are going to push us as churches? What have we kind of missed? So I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm kind of trying to read through the lens of how we've ended up where we've got, and I'm wondering, what's your critique of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, first of all, one of the critiques of evangelical Christianity is that it's over-focused on the epistles. Just as a comment, right there. So if you begin at the beginning, which is apparently a very good place to begin, and then you look at it in terms of, so God has created this world, what does he want us to do with it? Apparently it is to take care of it and to release the potential of it, to guard and release the potential in it. And it's holistic, it's not perfect, Garden of Eden. It is perfect, but it's not mature. So he wants us to do something. We have the fall. And after the fall, we're still given a mandate to do work. And he calls Abraham. What does he say to Abraham? I want you to, through you, I want to bless all nations. What does bless mean? Bless is actually a holistic word, as shalom is, as you know. It's a holistic word. It applies not merely to spiritual reconciliation, but to ecological, political, financial, emotional. Shalom in Hebrew, it's a big word. So it's all of that. So that's the goal. When he says to the people in Babylon, after they've been exiled, I want you to seek the peace and prosperity is the usual translation in many things, but actually it's one word, it's shalom. I want you to seek the shalom, the prosperity, the peace, the wholeness is the roots of this word of the city to which I've called you. Oh, right, and to pray for it. So both are there, but it's a holistic thing. When you look at, for example, what does the godly person look like in the Old Testament? The zenith of that
is Proverbs 31. So who's the person who lives out the fear of the Lord? Well, it's this woman. What does this woman do? Well, there's no mention there of worship services. There's no mention of going to the synagogue. It's all about how she works, actually what she does, how she cares for her family, how she trades internationally, and so on and so forth. When you look at, say, for example, you take somebody like Boaz, and you look at why is he called? Only 3 people in the Old Testament, individuals, are called people of high character, heroic character. Ruth, Boaz, and the woman of valor, renown, heroic character in Proverbs 31. And you look at why does the Holy Spirit draw attention to this character? Well, it's the way that he actually, through his loving kindness, reshapes his working practices in the field, responds to Ruth in a variety of ways with his workers, teaches them generosity, empowers them to be generous, and so on and so forth. So that you move on, and you're going, well, everywhere we go, it's holistic. So the prophets are not just saying, get your doctrine right. They're saying, live out this doctrine where? In the economics. In the way that you engage with the structure and systems, in weights and measures, and so on and so forth. And Proverbs is almost exclusively, not exclusively, but almost exclusively about a variety of behaviours in daily life. And the law is about what are the 1-degree shifts, what are the little things that we do that begin then to if we work in this way, it displays the kind of society that has a concern for the poor and for the alien and the exile. This is the kind of society we're trying to create. Display this. And then we come into Jesus. And what does Jesus say? Well, it's the kingdom has come. So in the kingdom, different things happen. So, so then we come to the epistles. And what happens in the epistles? Well, you've got this extraordinary vision at the beginning of Ephesians. In what areas are we not going to, if you like, apply the wisdom of God, the enlightened spirit? Because Ephesians, and what do we need to live in Ephesus? So all the power language in Ephesians is because of the particular context of Ephesus. The power language is not the same in Colossians and Philippians. The language set is different. Why? Because this is this massive temple that dominates the whole economy, one of the 7 wonders of the world, employing hundreds and hundreds of people. And power is the thing. So in order to live this life, to live out all of these things, yes, in the local church, yes, in the family, and yes, in economic relations and in workplace, you need that. So when you come to the back end of the epistles, as you rightly say, when you look at the household codes, you've got the 3 areas. You've got the local church, if you like, the community of Christ, ministering to one another. You've got, if you like, family relationship, husbands, wives, fathers, daughters, mothers and daughters, and so on and so forth. And you've got masters, slaves, and the economic thing. So I think it is holistic, actually, within those letters. That's not to deny that what you've got there is a reframing of the way that people are thinking about life in general. That's absolutely clear. Absolutely clear. And I would argue, so if you take salvation by grace and faith alone, for example, I would argue that in any culture, what we're doing, as Paul does, is to try to isolate the overall culture in our city or in our culture that needs to be spoken into. So, salvation by grace and faith alone, that's the Galatians issue. That's the issue in London. We're a work town. It's salvation by work. And so what do you need to preach in London? You definitely need to preach salvation by grace and faith alone, because identity is located in work. When I ask people in Edinburgh this question, Edinburgh, as you may know, is a Scottish town, and there are English people in Edinburgh. They let them in. And there are university people, and there are people who are English but now feel Scottish because they've been there a long time. Are they staying? Are they going? Am I a town person or am I a gown person? Am I a university student? Am I a true Scot and I've been here forever? Am I working class at all? So the question of what they want, what they feel they need to preach in that context is all one in Christ. In Christ there is no Scot and Englishman. There is no Eastern European and Asian. We're all one in Christ. So I would say that the narrative from beginning to end is holistic, and what we have is a new heaven and a new earth. So the renewal of all creation in which we will be working. So I absolutely understand, and I agree, that there is a focus in the letters around the way that these churches are operating, which relate, however, to the particular things in those churches, usually, that they're facing. So Corinth is Corinth. I mean, Corinthian stuff is about the issues that they're facing there. And what I would say, if you like, is that one of the issues for the preacher, and we may disagree, I guess, one of the issues for the preacher is how much Old Testament is preached. Because in the Old Testament what you have is you have more examples of how the people of God are in context trying to work out what to do. And they're not just Sunday school people. You see what I mean? So for me, the recovery of the Old Testament and the vigorous preaching of the Old Testament is one of the ways to give people a different biblical imagination of how God might work in and through them. The other side of it is what we do know, and we know this, is that the church we have today, in my culture, I'm not talking about your community, if you've cracked epistolary teaching and whole life discipleship, praise the Lord, and we need to talk because not many people have. But in the great preaching centres, the great preaching churches, it is very, very rare for them to be whole life disciple-making churches. It's just the case. So something is wrong with the hermeneutic. I may be wrong, and we've had this conversation during this week with people. Can we find out what's wrong with our hermeneutic? So I would encourage, a dialogue on this. But what we do know is, on the whole, people do not go to work thinking it's significant. And it is. Yeah. Sorry, that was the whole Bible in 3 minutes.
We might need to leave it there. We are out of time. And some